get into our first story, which is this settlement in reference to Jeffrey Epstein and JP Morgan. So I want to just backtrack to walk you through the events here. About a month or two ago, I explained to you that it had been revealed that JP Morgan actually was connected to Jeffrey Epstein because he was, part of their bank, and they actually funded those activities that happened on Epstein Island. Then later on, I explained to you that it was also revealed that JP Morgan apparently connected with Epstein in reference to the banking relationship after he had already been convicted. So they knew who he was, they knew what he was doing. And then I gave you another update that said that JP Morgan actually knew what the activities were that they were funding. So this has been an ongoing situation. Names have been released like Noam Chomsky, Woody Allen, which that one actually did not surprise me, Chris Rock, all these people whose names have ended up in that black book, so to speak. But I'm pretty sure there will be more names, I think, that will be released in the future. But because JP Morgan did admit that they knew, there has been a settlement that has been offered to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. And I want to go ahead and get into that clip first.
Banking giant JP Morgan Chase agreeing to pay nearly $300 million to victims of accused and now deceased sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. The accusers say the bank ignored repeated warnings about Epstein, thereby allowing him to continue abusing girls and young women, all because he was a valuable client. Epstein killed himself while behind bars in 2019 before he could stand trial. Today,
I just want to pause there and let you know that think about what she just said, that JP Morgan knew, but they felt like Jeffrey Epstein as a client was more important and more valuable than those girls' mental capacity. They felt like that was more important. Let's continue.
A settlement still needs the approval of a judge. It comes just a few weeks after Deutsche Bank settled an Epstein lawsuit for $75 million. So joining us now is Kaja Whitehouse, senior finance editor with Business Insider. Kaja, thank you so much for being with us. How significant is it that this big time bank is now, no question, associated with Epstein and not in a good way?
I think it's very significant. Jeffrey Epstein, we all know, was a client of JP Morgan's for 15 years, from 1998 to 2013. And as with many things, Jeffrey Epstein, a lot of financial institutions, a lot of people, a lot of powerful people continue to have relationships even after he was convicted of procuring a child for prostitution in 2008. It was really only after he was charged in 2019 with sex trafficking, because it had been determined that there was a sweetheart plea deal back in 2008, that a lot of you started to see some of the lawsuits you see now, and some people sort of maybe stepping down from roles, and some consequences for that.
So I just want to point out to you, for those you are not aware, 2008 was the first time that he was convicted. He has been convicted more than once. I think a lot of people know about the more recent time, but he has been convicted prior to that. And it's that time point after 2008 where people still chose to have a relationship, whether it was a business relationship with Jeffrey Epstein or not. They still chose to do it because they felt like their bottom line was more important, and their bottom line was money. Because screw the victims, basically. This is a bank. You guys realize how big JP Morgan is? It's one of the top largest banks in the world. In the world. It's huge. Very powerful. Let's continue.
Kaja, this case claims that bank employees knew and were concerned about Epstein's money withdrawals because he was paying, underage girls for sex. But as you just laid out, he stayed a client for years. Do we know why bank executives allowed that to continue? I mean, does it all just come down to the almighty dollar?
Yes.
So I think it depends on who you ask. As you just pointed out, Epstein's victims say that they kept him around because he made them a lot of money. And a couple of years ago, the New York Times reported that high-level executives intervened to keep him as a client, even after compliance officials flagged him as a risk, because he played a lucrative role in helping them recruit new customers. As we know, he's got a lot of billionaire friends. But if you ask JP Morgan, they paint a very different picture, and that's some of what will continue to be litigated in other cases. They have denied that reporting. They paint this picture that executives didn't really know much about his 2008 plea. They didn't really know what was going on.
That was actually debunked. I'm sorry, but I reported that like weeks ago. That was actually debunked. So even the CEO, Jamie Dimon, knew.
And it was only after, in 2013, that they sort of realized he had been convicted a few years earlier, and they flagged him as a risk, and he was no longer a client. They are now suing one of their former executives, a guy named Jeff Staley, who ran the private bank until 2013, saying that he should have known.
Yeah.
So we'll find out.
Yeah. So much.
Jeff Staley's name was also one of the names that was mentioned in that book, in that Black book.
Money involved here. Kaja, as part of this, and to kind of piggyback off what you just said there, JP Morgan does not have to admit any liability. Do we know, do the victims still consider this truly justice?
So, that's hard for me to answer because this was a Jane Doe. I don't know who this person is. But, I think justice for most people here, the Miami Herald has found dozens and dozens of people who claim that they were victims of Jeffrey Epstein, right? And I think for the most part, you have to assume that what does justice mean? It sort of means that the people who wronged you admit what they did and they pay a price for it, right? We've seen a lot of money coming out of the woodworks lately, but we really haven't seen anybody accept any admission of wrongdoing, whether it's Jeffrey Epstein, who killed himself in jail and got a sweetheart deal in 2008 and then killed himself in jail. Ghislaine Maxwell, who's sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in his trafficking scheme, but, she did not admit any guilt either.
All right. Kaja Whitehouse with Business Insider. We certainly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about something here before I go to the article. Is this justice? Is this true accountability? Is $290 million a lot of money for JP Morgan? I don't think that is. Again, JP Morgan is huge. It's been around for a long, long time. A long, long time. One of the reasons why JP Morgan is as large as it is because during that financial crisis of 1917, it was actually the JP Morgan himself who decided to bail out the banks that were struggling in New York at that point in time. So if you hear someone say the phrase that JP Morgan kind of saved and rescued the federal government, they could be referring to that time in 1917 when he jumped in and did that. And because he added those banks, that's how JP Morgan was able to grow the way that it did. So he basically consumed the banks that were struggling at that point in time. Instead of saying, let me help you out, he said, let me just buy you for myself. And that's why one of the reasons why it's so much larger now. So with $290 million, you have to understand to JP Morgan is probably peanuts. So there was money that was paid. There was a settlement. Does that undo the trauma that these women have gone through? Does that undo the mental strain that they're going to have for the rest of their lives? Does it undo that? No, I don't think it does. And this reminds me of something else. When we talk about the bankers being held truly accountable, it reminds me of the 2008 housing crisis, where the banks were not held accountable. When Wall Street, when banks like Wells Fargo basically took homes from mainly elderly Black people, and Barack Obama, who was president at that time, chose to bail out Wall Street instead of bailing out the American people, they were not held accountable. What should have happened? All those bankers should have went to jail. All of them. They still got to keep. This makes no sense to me. All those bankers, you stole people's homes. When you steal someone's home, you steal a piece of their generational wealth. You understand that? You take a piece of their net worth. If you have home ownership, that's a significant piece of having net worth. And so there was no accountability there. Those people lost their homes and the bankers got off scot-free. And I said it back then, they all should have been held accountable. So here we go again with another bank. You have JP Morgan. Obviously, they should be held accountable. And $290 million to me is not being held truly accountable. That is peanuts for JP Morgan. And all of them involved, they should have to stand trial. Jamie Dimon, you should have to stand trial. And I know he was subpoenaed, but they should have to stand trial. I find it hard to believe that this just continues to go on because the banks are so powerful. So when people tell me I need to be mad at my neighbor, when people tell me I need to be mad at the person who has a different political ideology than me, no, you need to be mad at these banks. You need to be mad at the people who are at the top, who are actually, they have so much wealth and they refuse to distribute it in such a way that could actually help more people in this country. Those are the people that you need to be upset with, not your neighbor who's working at Dunkin' Donuts, who's just trying to get by. Now, I want to go into this article here. It says JP Morgan prepared to pay $290 million in settlement with Jeffrey Epstein victims. So this piece is important. It says the bank's litigation with the U.S. Virgin Islands in the Epstein matter remains. However, its claims against former executive Jess Staley, who was friends with Epstein, are also active. Last week, lawyers for the Epstein victim called Jane Doe 1 in documents asked the court to reopen JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon's deposition. So let's go on here. The announcement of the settlement came just hours before a judge ruled that the case in the U.S. District Court in Manhattan can proceed as a class action lawsuit. The bank did not include details about the agreement in that announcement. The person familiar with the deal requested anonymity. I don't know why I would say that word like that. Anonymity to discuss the details of the settlement. The parties in Jane Doe 1 versus JP Morgan Chase Bank have informed the court that they have reached an agreement in principle to settle the putative class action lawsuit related to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, which is subject to court approval. The parties believe this settlement is in the best interest of all parties. Really? The best interest of all parties would to make sure that those bankers are also arrested, in my opinion. This is a mess, especially the survivors who were victims of Epstein's terrible abuse. JP Morgan added. The settlement announcement came 1 month after Deutsche Bank, where Epstein became a client after he was forced out by JP Morgan in 2013, settled with Epstein victims for $75 million. JP Morgan's litigation with the U.S. Virgin Islands is ongoing. Monday's settlement stems from claims filed last year by an unnamed woman using the pseudonym Jane Doe that the bank knowingly benefited from and facilitated Epstein's sex trafficking operation. The woman who alleges she was assaulted and trafficked sued on behalf of a large number of other victims of that operation. We all now understand that Epstein's behavior was monstrous, and we all believe this settlement is in the best interest of all parties, especially survivors who suffered unimaginable abuse at the hands of this man. Yeah, at the hands of this man, but at the same time, the bank played right into it because you were continuing to fund it. You had business with him after he had already been convicted in 2008. Let's go on. Any association with him was a mistake and we regret it. That's not what Jamie Dimon said. That is not what Jamie Dimon said. Jamie Dimon said that he knew of Jeffrey Epstein and he knew that he had already been convicted. Who's the CEO of JP Morgan? Jamie Dimon. Let's continue. We would have never continued to do business with him if we believed he was using our bank in any way to help commit heinous crimes. That's a lie. Brad Edwards, an attorney for the lead plaintiff in the case, lauded the enormously valuable support the Virgin Islands provided to Epstein's victims. We recognize the importance of the government's continued litigation against JP Morgan Chase to prevent future crimes. They really think that we are stupid. $290 million. Not even 300 million, by the way. $290 million is supposed to make things good again. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. Thank you so much. That helps me with the algo. But we have to continue to follow this. At least I'll continue to follow this because I feel like there's more news about this every week. And this is just crazy. Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan. How do we know other banks aren't participating in some type of act like this? How do we know? Maybe it's not Jeffrey Epstein anymore. Maybe it's someone else. I find it hard to believe that it was just this one person. My spidey senses are going off. Spidey senses. Going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Dwayne said, yes, they do, Sabby. They have nothing but contempt for us. Violin says, this is an insult to injury. Bad Cookie says, sadly, Sabby, the majority of Americans don't even care about Epstein. This is true, too. Thank you, Philly. Philly says, JP Morgan net income is $12.6 billion, up 52% first quarter 2023. 290 million. Give me a break.